Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, today joined by Makone Maja. Let's get into the first news story of today. And this is a great opinion piece, I think it is, written by Jabulani Sikakane about Johannesburg and what some might charitably call Johannesburg's eternal budget optimism, but what might more realistically be called Johannesburg's habit of creating illusionary, fanciful budgets. So Mr. Sekukane here writes about how the city of Johannesburg is beginning its annual flight of fancy, which is its budgeting process, where every year it projects great financial performances, not for this year necessarily, but for 2 and 3 years in the next financial cycle. Everything is going to turn around. The money's cash reserves are going to fill up. It's going to be absolutely amazing. They're always projecting that they're going to have significant amounts of money, cash on hand at the end of the year. For example, they'll say, we have 90 days of cash to be on hand at the end of the year, 17 billion rand, or they say we should be able to cover our costs for 142 days in cash at the end of the year. But when it actually gets to it, they're lucky if they have half of the projected amount. When it comes to capital expenditure, the city of Johannesburg for the 2024-2025 financial year had forecast that its cash reserves would fund 26% of its capital expenditure, more than 8 billion rand. They then trimmed it down slightly, and 3 months before the end of the financial year, they admitted that their cash resources would only pay for about 16% of their capex expenditure, which is, almost half of what they originally budgeted for. And this is essentially a way of just projecting, of making it look like you're budgeting responsibly, when in fact you're budgeting irresponsibly by just not sticking to it. And the result is that many of our municipalities, it's not just a Joburg problem, many of our municipalities across the country have this problem. And the result is they end up having to go with a begging bowl, either to their own ratepayers by pushing up the prices and the taxes, or to the national government asking for bailouts. Makone, what do you make of this problem? I think this is very deeply connected to why Johannesburg seems to be in the state that it's in right now.
Absolutely. And to your point, Nick, that this is not a unique problem for Johannesburg, but that this is rampant across municipalities in the country. I think Sikakane makes a great item to note that Johannesburg is one of the big cities. It's the biggest city, right? And the idea was that these big cities would eventually, because they have enough ratepayers to raise adequate revenues, would be weaned off of those government grants which they use to supplement their lack of cash flows. And you can see from this article that the city is far from that. They have these great budgets, these great amounts that they envision they will have enough to carry them through up to 3 months. And yet they can't even get through 16 days, as he points out. And this isn't just an issue that affects ratepayers, but also people that do business with the municipality. How could you possibly go into business with such a disorganized organization? And how could you continue supplying this municipality with services when you realize there's little cash available to pay people timelessly at the end, to pay these companies that do business with this municipality at the end? I think it paints a very glib picture, and this is why you're seeing Treasury step in to make stronger reinforcements around things like credit control and cash flows of municipalities and how the money is spent, limit when debt can be acquired to fund only things like capital expenditure. But it's not very encouraging, because you would expect that a city like Johannesburg would have at least maybe second to Cape Town in terms of the highest rate paying number of residents. And yet it manages its finances very poorly. There's not enough cash flow at the end to pay for things. So it really shows that the system is deeply flawed, deeply rotten, and it'll likely take a lot longer. I think this is also the thing that ratepayers need to come to terms with, that it'll be years before many of the city's financial issues are resolved. It's not going to happen in one mayoral term. at least not from Dada Moreto. He told us that on day one to not expect much from him. But yeah, you even if you change hands, you change political parties, I think it'll be a while before the city is able to function efficiently.
Right. It's about repairing that trust between those who pay the rates and the city, that both sides have to expect the other not to cheat them. And that cycle of trust has been, I think, so badly broken that it's going to, as you say, it's going to take definitely a while, even if the budgeting started being responsible all of a sudden. Let's move on to our next story. And this is a point we've raised before on the show, but it's worth reiterating. A group of doctors lobbying against the implementation of the National Health Insurance Scheme that was signed into law recently by President Ramaphosa has pointed out that in order to fund the proposed national health insurance, the government will need to raise an additional 240 billion to 270 billion rand in order to make the act feasible. They have said that this amounts to a tax increase of up from 15%, or soon to be 16%, I suppose, to 23%, or a 40% surcharge on personal income tax, a payroll tax of 13.4%, or increasing corporate income tax from 27% to 45%. Now, what's interesting about this is, obviously we thought this was a really good point to make about how unaffordable NHI is beforehand. But it's now very clear that this is also politically impossible to raise the amount of money that NHI requires. Look at what has happened to the government in its attempts to raise the VAT originally by 2 percentage points. That had to be cut down to 0.5% this year and 0.5% next year. And that's, even that might still be in doubt. I think there's still some budget votes to go through. And so, maybe there'll be pushback against this in the next budgeting system. But the point being that the ANC no longer can just ram through tax increases on the population. They have to get consent from other political parties. And, well, there are some parties willing to offer them a lifeline, but it's a very narrow majority. Makone, what do you make of this?
That is the ultimate gift of the 2024 election, is we no longer have to be subject to just ANC monopolizing ideas and how the state runs. But I always want to take time to remind our viewers that our public representatives, our parliamentarians, and our former ministers of health saw it fit to table and pass the biggest social welfare program and budget afterwards. And also, these estimates from SAMA are some of the most modest, actually the lowest I've seen. Discovery benchmarks the expenditure for the NHI between like 500 and 600 billion. Momentum went all the way up to 1.3 trillion, but that was dubbed the Rolls Royce of health, of a health, universal health coverage. But still, SAMA's estimates are quite modest, and you see exactly by how many percentage points, well, not exactly, but the estimates of percentage points that would be required to raise those revenues to fund just the NHI alone. It's an impossible task. Apart from the cost of the NHI, there's also the premise, which I have a deep problem with. This idea that the government is going to tell doctors across South Africa, we're going to tell you where you can work. So close up all your practices, close up shop, because you are now going to work for us on our terms, on our conditions. There's no collaboration there. It's just government ordering medical representatives around. Just a huge mistake, because these people take care of our health as a nation. And also that it's unconstitutional. It goes without saying. It's one of the points SAMA raises in its case, that it's unconstitutional to dictate to healthcare professionals where they can and cannot work. So there's just so many things that are deeply flawed with the NHI. But above all, for me, the one that wrecks my brain is that they thought to pass the law first and do the math later for the biggest social welfare program in the country. Makes absolutely no sense.
And of course, it wasn't just that the parliament passed it with that lack of information, but now, of course, the president signed it into law with that lack of information. So it's on the books. It's supposed to be implemented, but there ain't no money for it. Little bits here and there being given to it by the Treasury. It's not a good idea to have laws or systems on the books that you then just don't implement. It creates uncertainty, creates bloat, creates inefficiency, and it prevents further reform in a more positive direction. So the NHI, I think, even on its own terms now, is a complete failure. Let's briefly go to our last story, and it was just kind of interesting because we were talking about this story beforehand, and we actually had quite different reactions to it. This is a story in Daily Maverick from a couple of days ago about a guy called Brian Chauke from Soweto. He's been unemployed for 17 years, but he says that he makes his money these days through the fact that he goes to big ATM queues in Soweto's various malls, and he offers to stand in line on behalf of people for 20 Rand. He says that his main customers are pensioners, old Gogos and Madalas, who he says that he'll take basically whatever they offer him in terms of cash. Sometimes it's just 5 Rand, and he'll stand in line for them so that they don't stand in line and fall over, and that this has enabled him to put food on the table. According to this interview, this guy earns somewhere between 300 Rand and 120 Rand a day, depending wildly on how many customers there are. Now, I thought of this story as kind of one of those tragic but slightly heroic stories of a South African who wants to work hard and put food on the table and, make their way in the world. He says that he has never stopped searching for formal employment, by the way, through this entire period. Makone, you had a slightly different reaction. And I think both of these speak to the difficulties that, we have in South Africa. We have not only this great unemployment crisis, but we also just suffer from the fact that law and order is fundamentally broken down, and social trust is justifiably, unfortunately, in some cases, at a bit of a low. What's your story about? What's your thoughts on this story?
On your law and order and the breakdown of trust in society, you're speaking to my take on this, which was that I've had such terrible experiences with people cutting in queues, mostly at like government offices, like Home Affairs. You're queuing to get your ID done.
And drivers' licensing departments as well.
TCR, the DTICs, yes. Standing in queue to, get your passport issued, and somebody cuts you in line and brings along with them a queue of 5 other people who just skip through the queue and pay him off, and then he gets to walk away and do it to somebody else, either behind you or in front of you. And the staff at Home Affairs just turns a blind eye. But I'm sure that this is not the story of Mr. Brian Chauke. It seems that his business operation is above board. And I think, it symbolizes that people really do want work. This idea that I particularly frustrated with us defining unemployment along like an expanded definition and an official definition. It's just looking at those people who have been discouraged and in despair and saying, let's not count them anymore. Let's not think about, let's just get them out of our mind because we're chasing these vanity metrics, right? That's what we're chasing is a lower statistic. And so we have to ignore.
It's not like the lower statistic is much better. I mean, the official unemployment rate is only, 10 percentage points better than the unofficial. It's still like a third of the country.
It's awful. It's terrible. But it does help when you can say to the 10 percentage points on the expanded definition, it's not as bad, right? That's the impression that it gives off. But yeah, it also just brings up these images of those men you'll often see when you're driving on South African roads, men lugging these huge trolleys that take up as much space as a car sometimes. People that do that demonstrate that they want work. They'd rather be doing something else with their lives to bring in revenue, to make money, live a life of dignity, and feed their families. So yeah, kudos to Mr. Brian Chauke, who seems to be doing that with this side job that he has. But there are those criminal elements where you will be cut in line. I do want to distinguish that this is likely at a government office. But yeah, those should not, we shouldn't be with the barbed wire.
I think that's the reality, is that, so many people have to hustle, and like some people in the world, they are hustlers. They hustle for money. They make plans. They're always working. They're always playing at the economic game. Some of those people are dodgy. Some of them are honest. But, I think the fact that so many South Africans, we essentially have to be a nation of hustlers. And that actually, I think, is not a good basis to build from, because there's very little certainty in that. you're making a different amount of money every day. It's very difficult to build stable foundations, particularly for your kids, if tomorrow you don't know if you're going to have 100 Rand or 60 Rand to spend on them. And, the cost is real tragedy for many human lives, is that people aren't able to realize dreams. They aren't able to build investments. They aren't able to invest in real estate, buying a nice house for themselves, making sure their kids get a proper education. So what we are really seeing in South Africa over and over again is wasted human potential. And that is the great tragedy of our current economic policy framework, is that it wastes human potential to an unimaginable degree. All right. Sorry, that was a bit of a down note, but anyway, it is a great crisis in our country, so I guess it's appropriate. But thank you very much for listening today. We hope you found the show interesting, and we will be back tomorrow on The Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone. The Daily Friend Show and The Daily Friend are a project of the Institute of Race Relations, the IRR. The IRR is a think tank which was founded in 1929 to study race relations in South Africa and works to change government policy to improve race relations through non-racialism and to ensure the prosperity of all South Africans. If you like our work and would like to support us, please go to irr.org.za and click Support the IRR. Or you can go to thedailyfriend.co.za and click the Fund Us button.